The meeting invite came without a subject line, just a time. 10 minutes. Friday afternoon. That alone should have told me something was wrong. I had finished the quarterly report less than an hour earlier, the one everyone suddenly needed, the one that explained why certain optimizations would quietly implode by summer. I sent it, closed my laptop, and walked into the conference room still thinking about footnotes. Ethan Blackwell didn't look up when I entered. 39 years old, new CEO, crisp suit, iPad already unlocked. He smiled the way people do when they've already made up their minds and want credit for being polite about it. "Vera," he said flatly, eyes still on the screen. "Your role no longer makes financial sense for where we're headed. We're ending your employment today. No pause, no lead-in, no apology, nothing." There's a small note. The following story includes fictionalized elements and is enhanced with AI, assisted narration, for educational and emotional impact. It is intended to explore professional ethics, responsibility, and consequence. If this kind of content isn't for you, feel free to step away, rest well, and take care of yourself. I had been Director of Strategic Operations for 16 years. I handled the problems the board didn't want on slides: regulatory landmines, vendor failures, quiet settlements, the work that never made headlines but kept the company breathing. Ethan knew none of that. He hadn't opened my file. He didn't need to. He liked the word streamline. People were just excess weight. HR sat beside him, perfectly still, a decorative plant with a badge. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't remind him of anything I'd fixed while others took credit. I asked one question: "Is this effective immediately?" Ethan finally looked up and nodded. Calm, relieved. Yes, that was it. 10 minutes hadn't even passed. I stood, thanked no one, and walked out. I felt every eye in the hallway turn away. Not sympathy, not anger, just avoidance. At the elevator, I caught my reflection in the glass. I was smiling, not because I was calm, not because I was brave, but because they thought this was finished. This channel exists because shared stories build stronger people. When you subscribe, you help protect that space, a space for truth, respect, and lived experience. That's how change actually starts. The news traveled faster than I did. By the time I reached my desk, people already knew. At 9:15, Ethan sent the internal announcement: "We're moving in a new direction." It said, no name, no explanation, just momentum, as if direction itself were a virtue. By 9:20, HR appeared beside my desk with a checklist and urgency that suggested I was now a logistical inconvenience. 2 hours. That was all I was given to hand over 16 years of institutional memory. Email access, shared drives, calendars that mapped decisions nobody remembered making, meetings scheduled months ahead, now suddenly irrelevant. I worked quietly, not because I agreed, but because I refused to give them the satisfaction of a scene. While I forwarded files, memories surfaced uninvited. 3 major deals salvaged after last-minute regulatory reversals. 1 acquisition saved when a supplier collapsed overnight. 2 CEOs ago. I'd been the person called after midnight, when optimism failed and reality demanded answers. I never made headlines. I made outcomes survivable, reliability. I learned early, rarely looks impressive in a boardroom. Ethan passed my desk once, carrying a stack of printed slides like a shield. He loved PowerPoint. He loved clean narratives and hated anything that required context. If it's not documented, it doesn't matter. He liked to say, history, to him, was clutter. The worst moment came from someone else. A young manager I'd trained years ago hovered awkwardly, then leaned closer, lowering his voice as if offering kindness. "You're not really essential anymore. Vera," he said. "The systems can handle most of it now." I looked at him. He looked hopeful, like he wanted my approval. I nodded, not because he was right, but because explaining the difference between systems and responsibility would have wasted breath I no longer owed this place. At 11:10, HR slid the handover document across my desk. I read every line, slowly. One sentence caught my attention, buried between routine acknowledgments and legal padding. I paused. Then I signed, deliberately, letting the pen drag just long enough to feel the weight of it. There. The building went quiet the moment I left it. But the silence didn't lift when the weekend arrived. Saturday came without urgency, without follow-up calls, without the panic I had half expected and half dreaded. No one reached out, no one checked in. The company moved on as if 16 years had been erased with a calendar reminder. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't write a clarification email. I didn't update my profile or post a thoughtful announcement about new beginnings. Those gestures felt premature, almost dishonest. Silence, I learned, can be a form of accuracy. Instead, I opened old files. I sat at my kitchen table and pulled up archived emails, reports, drafts marked final and then revised again. The kind of work nobody revisits once it functions. I wasn't searching for leverage. I wasn't planning a counterattack. I was inventorying memory, checking that my understanding of the past still matched the record. It did, years earlier, during a fragile expansion. I had been asked to advise on capital restructuring. The board wanted flexibility without visibility, stability without headlines. I proposed a trust structure for senior leadership, something conservative, lawful, almost boring. Ownership without noise, control without theater. When my turn came, I followed my own advice. I didn't take shares directly. I placed them into a family trust, documented, reviewed, quietly maintained. No announcements, no ego. It was the kind of decision that never mattered until suddenly it did. Back then, no one asked why I declined a more visible stake. They were busy celebrating growth, applauding forecasts, chasing valuation multiples. Questions slow momentum. I was useful because I didn't. The weekend passed like that, slowly, precisely. I cooked, cleaned, slept, outside. Nothing changed. Inside, something settled. A cold awareness, not fear. Pattern recognition. I thought about Ethan's certainty, about the ease with which he'd dismissed history as clutter. I wondered if he had ever looked past surface ownership, if he understood the difference between control and appearance. They never asked, I told myself. Staring at the screen, that was their mistake. Late Sunday evening, my laptop chimed. An automated message, no sender name, just a system notification routed to an old address I hadn't bothered to remove. Shareholder registry update scheduled, Monday 8:00 a.m. I read it twice. Then I closed the laptop and went to bed. I didn't feel victorious or defeated, just alert. Something was shifting beneath the surface, gears turning without my input. I understood then that consequences rarely arrive with noise. Sometimes they wait for schedules, timestamps, and rooms full of people who believe nothing important happens quietly, especially before a Monday morning that changes everything for everyone involved inside. The realization came without drama, which somehow made it sharper. By Monday morning, I understood exactly what Ethan had never bothered to learn. I was not a shareholder in the way he recognized. My name did not sit plainly on the registry. It didn't need to, years earlier, under an entirely lawful structure. I was listed as the beneficial owner through a family trust. Clean, boring, effective. The kind of ownership invisible to people who only skim summaries. Voting rights followed the trust, not the headline name. That distinction mattered. It always had. Ethan had never opened the detailed registry, never scrolled past the surface layer where confidence feels justified. He believed control looked loud. I knew it rarely did. I didn't rush to act. I didn't adjust a single document. I didn't call anyone to clarify. The system didn't require my interference. It required patience. If you've ever worked inside a company long enough to see power misread as volume, you already know how this part feels. There's a moment when outrage burns hot, then cools into something far more useful. That was where I stood. Not angry, focused, watching. I reviewed the structure again, not to change it, but to confirm it would do exactly what it was designed to do when stressed. Every clause aligned, every delegation intact. The trust didn't react emotionally, it responded procedurally. Governance has a way of revealing who understood it and who merely inherited it. Ethan, I was certain, fell into the second category, so I let Monday arrive. I went about my morning as if nothing had shifted, because from my position, nothing had. The process would move forward on its own timetable, through its own channels, board notifications, legal reviews, questions asked too late. I thought about how often leadership mistakes confidence for understanding, and how many careers disappear because someone never looks beneath a summary page. If you're listening to this and thinking of a moment when you were dismissed without being understood, you're not alone. Most systems don't fail loudly, they fail politely, following rules written by people who assumed everyone would read them. I trusted those rules. They had never failed me before, and they weren't about to start now. Control, I realized, isn't about force. It's about positioning yourself where time, process, and impatience work on your behalf, while others exhaust themselves arguing with outcomes they created. That lesson arrived quietly, as designed. Late that afternoon, my phone vibrated. A message from a board member I hadn't spoken to in months. Did something change with voting rights? I stared at the screen for a long moment before locking it again. Nothing had changed. That was the problem. At this point, do you feel something is about to happen? I spent most of Monday afternoon doing nothing, which turned out to be the hardest decision of my career. The options were obvious. I could call a lawyer and ask for language sharp enough to cut through panic. I could draft a careful email to the board, warning them that the registry they thought they understood had layers they had never reviewed. Either move would have been defensible. Either would have made me look reasonable, cooperative, helpful. That was the temptation. I opened my phone more than once. I hovered over contacts I knew by memory. Years of habit told me to intervene, to stabilize, to prevent damage before it spread. That had always been my role. The person who stepped in quietly before mistakes became disasters. This time, I stopped myself. I asked a different question, one I had never allowed myself to ask while employed there. If the system collapses when I leave, maybe it deserves to, not out of spite, not out of revenge, but out of truth. A structure that only functions when one unacknowledged person absorbs its failures is not a system. It's a liability pretending to be stability. I hadn't built the trust structure as a weapon. I built it as a safeguard, assuming competent leadership would respect it, understand it, and plan accordingly. If they hadn't bothered to look past the surface, that omission belonged to them, not me. Interfering now would only continue the pattern. Silence, in this case, was not neglect. It was integrity. So I chose restraint. I left the documents untouched. I sent no warnings. I corrected no misunderstandings. I let governance do what it was designed to do when assumptions failed and confidence outpaced comprehension. There is a particular kind of power in refusing to rescue people from consequences they engineered themselves. What surprised me was not the fear, but the calm. The absence of urgency felt unnatural at first, like forgetting an appointment you once built your life around. Yet with each passing hour, the stillness sharpened my thinking instead of dulling it. That evening, I turned my phone face down on the table and walked away from it. I made dinner slowly. I ate without distraction. For the first time since Friday, my thoughts felt aligned with my actions. No scrambling, no damage control, just stillness and resolve. When I finally picked up my phone again, there was another message waiting. Emergency board call scheduled. I read it once, then set the phone back down. Whatever happened next would happen without my fingerprints on it. And that, I realized, was the cleanest choice I had left. Silence had finally become my most deliberate professional decision ever. Monday morning arrived with the kind of tension you can feel before you hear it. I wasn't in the room, but I knew exactly when the emergency board meeting began. These things have a rhythm. Calendars get cleared, assistants whisper, legal joins early. I learned most of it afterward, through fragments that filtered back to me from people suddenly unsure who they could trust. The meeting was called to order with unusual urgency. No small talk, no quarterly pleasantries. The company's general counsel opened a folder no one expected to see that early in the week. He didn't start with opinions. He started with structure. He explained that a change in voting rights had been triggered automatically following a termination event, not by intent, not by action, by design. A shift embedded in the shareholder registry that had executed exactly as written. Ethan interrupted almost immediately. "That's impossible," he said, louder than necessary. "She's not a shareholder." The room went still. The attorney adjusted his glasses and answered without emotion. "Not directly." Those two words landed harder than any accusation. Beneficial ownership, trust-held interests, proxy voting rights. The mechanics Ethan had never bothered to review were now projected onto a screen he could no longer control. I imagined his expression then, the confidence draining slowly as legal language replaced slogans. This wasn't a hostile takeover. It wasn't sabotage. It was compliance unfolding in real time. Questions followed, sharp and layered. When was this structure approved? Who reviewed it? Why hadn't it been flagged during the transition? Each answer led back to the same quiet truth. The documents had always been there. No one had looked closely enough, from what I was told. Ethan tried to regain momentum. He blamed outdated governance. He blamed advisors. He blamed complexity. None of it stuck. The registry didn't care about intent. It only recognized accuracy. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee untouched, feeling something unexpected settle in. Not triumph, not revenge, satisfaction, yes, but muted. The kind that comes from watching a system reveal itself honestly after being underestimated. Then came the moment that fractured the room. One of the longer-serving board members stood up, not angry, curious. Then why didn't we know, he asked. No one answered right away, because knowing would have required humility, because looking deeper would have slowed decisions, because someone decided it was easier to fire a person than to understand what she had built. The meeting recessed shortly after that. I didn't need updates anymore. The chaos had done its work. The process was moving forward, indifferent to panic. I finished my coffee, finally cold, and realized I was smiling again. Quietly, this time. It felt earned. By late Monday afternoon, the chaos had a direction. It always does. Panic burns hot at first, then cools into accusation. The board fractured quickly. Long-serving members demanded explanations. Newer ones demanded distance. Committees formed and dissolved within the same hour. Strategic votes were postponed, then quietly suspended altogether. Nothing could move forward without clarity, and clarity was suddenly expensive. From what filtered back to me, Ethan tried to seize control the only way he knew how. He blamed legal. He questioned the competence of advisors he had personally approved. He argued that governance structures were outdated, overly complex, misaligned with modern leadership. At one point, he dismissed the entire situation as an administrative oversight that could be corrected with the right memo. When that failed, he pivoted. I was told he referred to me as a risk, a legacy risk, a governance anomaly, a complication no one anticipated. The implication was clear. If I hadn't existed, none of this would be happening. It was easier to frame me as a problem than to admit he had made a decision without understanding its consequences. What surprised him was the silence that followed. No one defended him. Board members who had once praised his decisiveness now avoided eye contact. Those who had supported the termination leaned back, suddenly interested in procedure. The revolt wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was expressed through pauses, unanswered questions, and the unmistakable shift of attention away from the CEO and toward the facts. Every strategic initiative was tabled. Expansion plans froze. Vendor negotiations stalled. A company built on momentum found itself unable to authorize its own next step. The cost of certainty, it turned out, was patience. Ethan had none left to spend. I heard that he demanded someone be held accountable. That legal should have flagged the risk. That HR should have known. That I should have disclosed more. That was when the general counsel finally spoke with clarity. The termination itself triggered this. He said, not the trust, not the registry, not a hidden maneuver, the firing. Those words settled the room in a way nothing else had, because they were clean, undeniable. The consequence had not been engineered. It had been activated. I wasn't present, but I could picture the moment perfectly. The realization that the collapse wasn't external. It was self-inflicted, a decision made too quickly, justified too casually, now echoing through every layer of governance. By evening, the board had adjourned without resolution. The revolt wasn't over. It had just found its footing. The call came just after sunset, when the day had finally stopped pretending to be productive. I recognized the number immediately and let it ring once longer than necessary. When I answered, Ethan's voice sounded unfamiliar, softened by urgency and something close to embarrassment. "Vera," he said, carefully. "We might have acted too fast." I didn't respond right away. Silence has weight when you allow it. I let him hear the quiet he had rushed past on Friday. "You said it wasn't personal." I finally replied, "Just business." He exhaled, as if relieved I'd spoken at all. He began explaining context, pressure, incomplete information, words assembled to sound reasonable now that the outcome had turned hostile. He spoke about misunderstandings, about legal nuance, about how no one could have predicted this reaction from the board. I listened without interrupting, not because I agreed, but because interruption would have suggested urgency on my part. I had none left. "We value what you built," he continued. "Your experience, your institutional knowledge. This situation could stabilize quickly if you came back." There it was. The offer disguised as collaboration. He didn't apologize. He reframed. The same instinct that had dismissed me was now asking me to repair what it broke. I imagined him pacing, watching the board slip from his control, realizing too late that confidence without comprehension collapses under scrutiny. "You want me to return?" I said evenly. "Yes," he answered, faster than he should have. "We can discuss title, scope, compensation, whatever makes sense." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. The irony was clean. Days earlier, my role had no longer made financial sense. Now it was apparently essential to restoring order. I looked at the wall across from me, at nothing in particular, and let the seconds stretch. 3, 4, 5. The silence unsettled him. I could hear it in his breathing, in those seconds. I understood something clearly. This was not about reconciliation. It was about containment. He didn't want me back because he respected me. He wanted me back because the system had stopped bending to his will. Finally, I spoke. "Ethan," I said, calmly. "I didn't leave anything unfinished." He hesitated. "I know," he said. "That's why we need you." I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them again. The quiet returned, deliberate and controlled, and for the first time since the call began. I knew exactly what I would say next. I chose my words with care, not to wound him, but to preserve the clarity he had avoided. The pause wasn't hesitation, it was recognition. Some doors close quietly, and the sound only reaches those who finally learn how to listen at last. Now, when I finally answered Ethan, the decision had already been made. Saying no didn't feel dramatic. It felt clean, like setting something down after carrying it too long. I told him calmly that I wouldn't be returning. Not in any capacity that pretended Friday hadn't happened. I don't work for companies that only respect people after spreadsheets panic. I said. He went quiet. Not angry, not persuasive, just stunned. The kind of silence that follows when leverage evaporates. He thanked me anyway, as if gratitude could retroactively soften damage. I ended the call without ceremony and sat there, breathing evenly, waiting for the aftershock. It came quickly. By Tuesday morning, the board had moved. Ethan was asked to step aside pending review. Language chosen carefully to preserve appearances while draining authority. Within hours, the market noticed. The stock wavered, then dipped again. Analysts began asking questions they should have asked earlier. Confidence, once assumed, now required evidence. Emails leaked. Meetings were postponed. Partners delayed commitments. Reputation erodes faster than revenue. And this time, the erosion was visible. Ethan's name became shorthand for a decision made too fast and understood too late. He had streamlined himself out of credibility. I watched from a distance, not with satisfaction, but with a sense of alignment. This wasn't revenge. It was consequence. Governance asserting itself after being ignored. The system correcting a misread input, late that afternoon. I received another message. This one was formal, polite, deliberate. The board would like to offer me a role, not operational, not executive, an advisory position, independent. No reporting lines, no daily responsibilities, just a seat at the table when decisions required context instead of confidence. I considered it carefully. This wasn't an attempt to undo the past. It was an acknowledgement of it. They weren't asking me to fix anything quietly. They were asking me to be present openly. I accepted. Not because I needed vindication, but because justice, when it's real, doesn't humiliate. It rebalances. It creates space where truth can survive without disguise. I didn't need Ethan's job. I didn't need an apology. I needed the structure to recognize what it had overlooked. As I signed the agreement, I felt lighter than I had in years, the kind of relief that comes not from winning, but from refusing to compromise dignity. Sometimes freedom arrives disguised as a refusal. Sometimes saying no is the most ethical act available. And sometimes, justice doesn't shout. It simply stands where it belongs. Finally visible, finally respected, and quietly immovable. I closed my laptop, stepped into the evening air, and understood that walking away had returned something priceless: control, clarity, and a future earned without fear at last now. Taking the advisory role felt less like a return and more like a correction. I no longer had an office, a team, or a title that impressed strangers. What I had was independence, and a voice that could no longer be ignored when it mattered. I attended meetings by invitation, not obligation, and spoke only when context was missing. There was no authority to wield, no daily power to perform. That absence was the point. Without operational control, my words carried weight precisely because they weren't entangled in ambition. I asked questions others avoided. I reminded the board of decisions they preferred to forget. When silence followed, it wasn't dismissal anymore. It was consideration. The company stabilized slowly. Governance tightened. Processes were reviewed instead of assumed. No one mentioned Ethan by name. His departure became a lesson folded neatly into policy updates and training slides. Reputation takes longer to rebuild than revenue, but honesty accelerates both, from the outside. My life simplified. Mornings were quieter. I chose my work deliberately. I stopped reacting and started deciding. The anger that once sat beneath my ribs dissolved into something steadier: self-respect. Justice, I learned, doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like alignment between values and outcomes. Occasionally, someone would ask if I missed being inside the machine. I didn't. Machines grind. Systems endure. I had become part of the latter, where leverage is measured in foresight, not force. On my final walk past the building, I paused without bitterness. The glass reflected a version of me that felt complete, not diminished. They fired me thinking they erased me. They never realized I was already written into the system. Quiet victories last longer, because they reshape institutions while leaving the person intact, accountable and free, without spectacle, noise, or borrowed authority. What this experience taught me wasn't about winning or losing a job. It was about understanding where real value lives. Titles can vanish overnight. Access can be revoked. Offices empty out. But the work you've done, the systems you've built, and the integrity you carried into each decision don't disappear just because someone higher up makes a careless choice. They stay, quietly, patiently, for a long time. I believed staying useful meant staying visible, staying agreeable, staying available. I was wrong. Sometimes the strongest position you can hold is knowing when not to step in, when not to fix what others broke, and when to let truth surface on its own. Justice doesn't always arrive with noise. Often, it arrives calmly, through structure, time, and consequences no one planned for. If you've ever been dismissed, overlooked, or replaced without being understood, I hope this story reminded you of something important. Your worth isn't erased by someone else's impatience. It's carried forward in ways you may not see yet. As you're listening, I'm curious, where are you tuning in from today? Let me know in the comments. Your perspective matters more than you think. If this story resonated with you, consider liking or sharing it with someone who might need the reminder. And if you want to hear more stories about quiet justice, hard-earned dignity, and what happens when systems correct themselves, subscribing helps keep this space going. We're not here just to tell stories. We're here to remember what they're for.